Only 6 months have passed since Nazi Germany surrendered. Europe lies in ruins. Cities that once glowed with parades and bright shop windows are now hollow shells of concrete and brick. People return to half-destroyed homes, orphaned children wander the streets, and crowded trains carry prisoners of war and refugees across the continent. It feels as if the worst is finally over. The leaders of the Nazi regime are either dead or sitting in prison cells, waiting for trial. The world is preparing for the Nuremberg trials and wants to put a final, heavy, full stop at the end of this nightmare. And right at that moment, when humanity is only beginning to believe that the horror is over, something strange starts happening at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. First, a single message arrives, then a second, then dozens. Telegrams from South America, field reports from agents in Spain and Italy, raw rumors overheard in the smoky bars of Buenos Aires, and neatly typed memos from American intelligence officers overseas. Different paper, different handwriting, sources that have nothing to do with one another. Yet all of these messages keep repeating the same line. Adolf Hitler is alive. He escaped. He is in South America. At first, FBI officers smirk. It sounds like a cheap rumor, an attempt to cash in on post-war hysteria. But the more reports pile up on the director's desk, the harder it becomes to simply wave them away. Some informants insist that Hitler arrived by submarine on the coast of Argentina. Others speak of an Aryan colony hidden in the mountains of Patagonia. Still others swear they saw a man who looked disturbingly like the Führer in a small town deep within the continent. And so an investigation is born, an investigation that will drag on for decades. Declassified FBI and CIA documents show that US intelligence never fully closed the file on Hitler's possible escape. This is not just a story about whether Hitler could physically make it to South America. It is a story about fear, about the early days of the Cold War, about secret escape routes for Nazi fugitives, and about how one unresolved death turned into the most persistent legend of the 20th century. Berlin, April 1945. The city is not simply dying. It is collapsing in real time. Hundreds of buildings burn like torches. Streets shake under the weight of tank treads. The air is thick with smoke, concrete dust, and the constant crackle of small arms fire. The Red Army tightens its grip on the center, slicing the once mighty defenses into isolated fragments. And beneath this chaos, just a few meters underground, lies one of the most infamous symbols of the war's end, the Führeranker. A claustrophobic maze of rooms and corridors, dim lamps flickering, stale air pressing down on everyone inside. According to the official version, on April 30th, 1945, the story of Adolf Hitler ends here. He supposedly commits suicide, after which his body is carried out into the garden and burned. But there is one problem. No body, no verified photographs, and no full forensic autopsy report were ever presented to the world. The Soviet investigation did indeed recover charred fragments of human remains, including a jawbone later identified as Hitler's. But the story is riddled with inconsistencies. Witnesses contradicted each other constantly. Several different suicide scenarios circulated in official documents. Numerous reports disagreed on crucial details. Much of the evidence remained classified for decades. And then came the statement that blew the entire narrative open. At the Potsdam Conference, Joseph Stalin personally told Winston Churchill, "Hitler may have escaped. We did not find his body." No one expected that. The world believed the case was closed. Yet the leader of the victorious Soviet Union suddenly implied the opposite. It is not closed. After that, the intelligence race began in earnest. American, British, and Soviet operatives, chasing rumors, blurry photographs, intercepted conversations, all tried to determine what really happened that April day. The bunker that was meant to mark the end of an era instead became the beginning of the most persistent mystery of the 20th century. Right after the war, in the late 1940s, a new, thick folder appeared inside the FBI archives. On its cover, stamped in bold red letters, was the title, Hitler, Escape. Its pages would remain sealed from the public for nearly 70 years. Only in the 21st century did we learn how much information American intelligence had tried to gather. Inside were field agent reports, intercepted letters, military intelligence memos, and dozens of civilian witness statements. Some were handwritten on cheap gray paper, clearly written in haste. Others were neatly typed with perfect margins. The geographic scope is astonishing. Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Spain and Portugal, major transit hubs. Uruguay and Paraguay, regions with strong German colonies. Switzerland, financial crossroads where SS money trails disappeared. Here is one fragment from an actual FBI report. According to reliable information, a former German admiral claims that Hitler arrived in Argentina by submarine in June 1945. Another report reads, German settlers in the Bariloche region are convinced that the Führer is already in Patagonia. They refer to him as Señor Ramon. A third document describes a witness meeting a man resembling Hitler, but with a beard, a different haircut, living under a Spanish name, staying at a ranch owned by a German family. The most important part is this. The FBI did not dismiss these messages as nonsense. Many documents bear handwritten instructions. Verify, send to naval intelligence, cross-examine source. The more such signals arrived, the harder it became to maintain the official narrative. Slowly, the idea of Hitler's escape transformed from a crazy rumor into a legitimate working hypothesis that U.S. intelligence was required to investigate. Decades later, once the files were declassified, it became clear. For the FBI, the question, did Hitler escape, was never a conspiracy theory. It was an active operational line of inquiry, pursued for real. To understand why the hypothesis of Hitler escaping specifically to Argentina became central in FBI and CIA investigations, we must return to South America in the 1930s and 1940s. Argentina at that time, despite its official neutrality, was strongly sympathetic to Germany. The country hosted a powerful German diaspora, with generations of teachers, engineers, officers, and immigrants. Dozens of schools taught in German. German newspapers circulated in Buenos Aires. And in some provinces, the German cultural presence was so strong that entire communities looked like transplanted Bavarian villages. After 1945, Argentina became a magnet for fleeing Nazis. This is not a rumor. This is a verified historical reality. Among those who found safe haven there were Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, Josef Mengele, the infamous doctor of Auschwitz, Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, and dozens of SS officers, Gestapo agents, and collaborators. They arrived via the infamous ratlines, underground escape networks created by Catholic clergy, former Abwehr officers, and European diplomats who supplied fugitives with forged Red Cross papers and shipped them across the Atlantic. A key element of the Argentine Hitler Trail is the Eichhorn family, wealthy landowners with enormous estates near Córdoba and Buenos Aires. Their ranch appears repeatedly in witness statements, police reports, and intelligence documents. Testimonies describe new guests arriving in May-June 1945, sudden increases in security around the property, closed trucks entering the grounds at night, and the owners avoiding journalists at all costs. One FBI report includes a striking line. If Hitler had chosen to hide in Argentina, the Eichhorn estate would be one of the first places he could have gone. All these fragments formed a picture in which Hitler, had he chosen to flee, could easily have disappeared among the same networks that sheltered dozens of Nazi war criminals. Argentina was not the end of the road. It was the beginning of a new shadow cast across the history of the 20th century. If the legend of Hitler escaping to South America ever needed a solid source of fuel, one of the strongest was a pair of German submarines that surfaced off the coast of Argentina long after Germany had already surrendered. This isn't rumor or speculation, it's hard data from naval archives. The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. Grand Admiral Dönitz, Hitler's successor, ordered all U-boats to cease operations and surrender. On paper, the story should have been over. But then, something unexpected happened. On July 10, 1945, 2 months after the war's end, the submarine U-530 entered the Argentine port of Mar del Plata and voluntarily surrendered. Then, on August 17, almost 6 weeks later, another U-boat, U-977, appeared in the very same port and also raised the white flag. What were these submarines doing in the Atlantic for all that time? Why didn't they surrender to the nearest Allied ports? Why did they specifically choose Argentina, a country already surrounded by rumors about Nazi fugitives? The commanders later offered explanations that sounded more like excuses. U-977's commander, Heinz Schaffer, claimed his boat took a long submerged route to avoid Allied ships. But when historians compared his story with travel times, crew accounts, and Allied air reconnaissance, some elements simply didn't add up. The case of U-530 is even murkier. Local police and naval intelligence records mention statements from fishermen and coastal residents. They saw a submarine close to shore days before the official surrender. Crates were allegedly transferred to small boats at night, and trucks with covered cargo were seen heading inland toward Patagonia. Official investigations never fully confirmed these reports, but they never completely disproved them either. One U.S. Navy intelligence report concluded cautiously, the possibility of cargo or personnel offload prior to surrender cannot be excluded. Against this backdrop, rumors spread along the Argentine coast. People claimed to hear engines at night, saw dark silhouettes offshore, and noticed unusual activity near remote coves. The official record speaks of 2 boats, but unofficial stories suggest there might have been more. However, no concrete documentary trace of any additional submarines has ever surfaced. These U-boats became a perfect building block for any escape theory. There was time after Germany's surrender. There were real voyages to South America. And there were lost days and nights before surrender. Even if Hitler himself never set foot on their decks, the very fact that these submarines showed up in Argentina after the war left an uncomfortable question hanging in the air. What exactly did they bring? And who might have stepped ashore before the flags were lowered and the hands went up? If U-boats answered how to get there, German colonies in Argentina answered the far more critical question, where to disappear. This is where the legend of Hitler's escape shifts from unlikely to logically plausible. Mid-20th century Argentina was unique. In Patagonia's mountains, Cordoba's valleys, and rural provinces, existed communities that were essentially miniature pre-war Germany. Houses built in Bavarian Alpine style, shop signs in German, bakeries, schools, and churches functioning as they would in Europe. Regions around Bariloche, La Falda, and nearby farmlands stood out. Some settlements lived in strict isolation, no questions asked, no outsiders tolerated. The most famous was the Eichhorn family ranch, a vast estate linked to Nazi officials, appearing in Argentine secret police and FBI files. Witnesses reported sharp security increases in May-June 1945, night trucks, covered windows, and unfamiliar Germans with strict manners. Another location was La Falda's Hotel Eden. Today, a crumbling relic. But in the 30s and 40s, it was a luxury resort owned by the German Eiseners, hosting the German-Argentine elite and, many historians believe, serving as a gathering place for Hitler supporters. Post-war testimonies claimed a German gentleman with a distinctive walk was seen, speaking only through intermediaries. Even more secretive was Villa Bavaria, later Colonia Dignidad, where escaped Nazis hid for decades. This place became a symbol of how deeply those with something to hide could vanish. Together, all this paints a clear picture. Fugitives had prepared hideouts, communities willing to accept them, and infrastructure to make a man disappear instantly. If Hitler had reached South America, Argentina was one of the very few places he could have vanished without a trace, as if he had never existed at all. After World War II, American intelligence agencies, much like their Soviet counterparts, found themselves in a stark new global reality. The Cold War had begun. In this tense atmosphere, any hint of Adolf Hitler's survival was no longer just a rumor. It quickly escalated into a grave national security concern. The reasons why the United States simply couldn't close the Hitler file were both specific and logically compelling. First, there was Operation Paperclip. The U.S. was actively extracting German scientists, brilliant rocket experts, chemists, and engineers, for their own strategic advantage. In this high-stakes endeavor, any information suggesting a top Nazi leader might still be alive was simply too valuable to disregard. Second, massive amounts of Nazi assets had mysteriously disappeared. Vast quantities of gold, bonds, diamonds, and currency. If Hitler had indeed survived, it was plausible that a portion of these illicit financial flows might have followed him. U.S. intelligence tirelessly tried to trace every single fragment of this missing wealth. Third, intelligence agencies like the FBI and CIA were well aware that countries like Argentina, Paraguay, and Chile were actively sheltering thousands of Nazi fugitives. If notorious figures like Josef Mengele and Adolf Eichmann could successfully hide in South America, then why couldn't someone even higher up the hierarchy? Fourth, the Soviet Union's documentation regarding Hitler's death contained notable inconsistencies, conflicting dates, vague details, and contradictory witness sequences. Given the nascent Cold War distrust, the United States simply couldn't fully rely on the Soviet version of events. And finally, for decades, the FBI continuously received reports from ordinary citizens, sailors, farmers, expatriates, and travelers. While many of these tips were clearly nonsensical, a significant number were detailed enough to warrant thorough investigation. The ultimate result, according to now declassified documents, the Hitler case was never truly closed. It was officially suspended. There wasn't enough definitive evidence to declare him alive, yet critically, there also wasn't enough evidence to definitively declare him dead. For intelligence agencies, such profound ambiguity is often the worst-case scenario, because it means, irrevocably, the case must remain open. One of the most enigmatic chapters in the search for Adolf Hitler after World War II originated from Colombia. It was 1955, and a CIA field station received a truly bizarre report. An agent named Philip C. Tenda detailed an encounter he had shortly after the war. He claimed to have met a man who allegedly worked for Nazi fugitives and knew a very important escapee. This man introduced himself as Adolf Schüttelmeier, a German supposedly in hiding from Allied authorities. But the informant insisted on a shocking truth. Schüttelmeier was actually Adolf Hitler in disguise. The report meticulously described the man's altered appearance: a full beard, dark sunglasses, a distinctly different hairstyle, a more stooped posture, and clothing in the style of a typical South American local. Attached to this extraordinary report was a photograph. It depicted a middle-aged man sitting casually at a cafe table, cigarette in hand, wearing sunglasses, and sporting a beard. But the key points that caught the experts' eyes were the subtle yet striking similarities: the shape of the skull, the precise line of the nose, the distinct ears, and the characteristic tilt and position of the head, all eerily reminiscent of Hitler. For decades, this image has been a focal point of debate. Some dismiss it as pure coincidence, a trick of the light, or a case of pareidolia. Others argue the similarities are far too precise. The orbital bone structure, the cheek line, the temple, details that are difficult to alter. The photograph resurfaced publicly in 2017 when the CIA declassified the document. The debate, of course, continues to this day, with the man in the picture still unidentified and no definitive match ever found. The most crucial detail of all: neither the CIA nor the FBI discarded this report. Instead, it remained classified for over 50 years. This fact alone speaks volumes. It indicates that U.S. intelligence considered the information potentially significant, not merely a fringe theory to be ignored. Whether the man in the photograph truly was Hitler is not the key question. What matters is that U.S. intelligence encountered such compelling cases regularly, and, crucially, could not conclusively disprove them. This is precisely how legends survive. Countless small fragments, contradictions, and potential doppelgangers create a fog in which truth and fabrication blend together beyond recovery. Many stories from World War II disappeared along with their witnesses, but the legend of Hitler's escape is one of the few that did not fade. It grew stronger. And it didn't grow because of movies, rumors, or fiction. It grew because real history left too many unanswered questions. Why does the theory survive to this day? The reasons are grounded not in fantasy, but in documented inconsistencies. The first is the absence of a publicly verified body. No government ever presented Hitler's corpse to the world. Only a jaw fragment provided by the USSR, and even that remains debated. Everything else is testimony, reports, contradictions, fertile ground for any legend. Secondly, we have conflicting eyewitness accounts from the bunker. Some spoke of poison, others spoke of a gunshot, others of a double. There was no single, consistent narrative, no unified truth. Thirdly, German colonies in South America truly existed, and those colonies sheltered Mengele, Barbie, Eichmann, and hundreds more, for decades. If they could hide, it proves the infrastructure for escape was real. Then there are the two submarines that arrived after the war, U-530 and U-977, unquestionable facts. Their arrival dates contradict surrender protocols. This is not rumor. This is recorded history. And what about U.S. intelligence investigations? For decades, the FBI and CIA kept collecting reports, letters, photographs, field notes. These files remained classified for almost 70 years. If everything was obvious, why lock them away? We also have the doppelganger effect. Hitler did use body doubles, documented, and post-war sightings across Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil were too numerous to ignore. Most were nonsense, but some contained alarming detail. Finally, the vacuum of certainty. Even the victorious powers contradicted themselves. The USSR, the US, and Britain all had different timelines, different witness accounts, different interpretations. No single perfect explanation exists to this day. The legend survives because history left cracks, and human imagination always fills the cracks. It isn't the beauty of the myth that keeps it alive. It's the emptiness of the unanswered. When all facts are placed together, the submarines, the German colonies, the conflicting Soviet reports, the questionable testimonies, the South American photographs, the decades of FBI investigations, one thing becomes clear. The story of Hitler's death contains too many gaps. Official version. Hitler died in the bunker on April 30th, 1945. His jawbone was identified. Witnesses reported seeing the aftermath. But this version has problems. The USSR suppressed documents. Testimonies contradict each other. The cremation site was destroyed multiple times. Remains were shown selectively. No international verification was conducted. Alternative version. Hitler may have escaped Berlin.
Supporting this possibility are 2 U-boats arriving after Germany's surrender, German enclaves capable of hiding fugitives, FBI reports describing men strongly resembling Hitler, escape routes later used by hundreds of Nazis.
There is no direct evidence of escape, but also no definitive proof of death. This leads to the key fact: the FBI marked the case Hitler escape as suspended, paused, not closed. The missing body, fragmented documents, and chaos of 1945 created a historical paradox. The death scenario is the most likely. The escape scenario is the most enduring. The truth may remain forever hidden between the lines of documents that were destroyed, sealed, or never written.